What happens when a king believes he is greater than God? What happens when pride reaches its peak and a ruler forgets the source of his power? This is the story of King Nebuchadnezzar, the mighty ruler of Babylon, a man who conquered nations, built one of the greatest empires in history, and yet was humbled in the most shocking way possible. He was not defeated by an enemy army. He was not overthrown by a rebellion. Instead, God himself stripped him of his kingdom, his mind, and his very humanity, turning him into something like a wild beast. But why? Why would God do this to one of the most powerful men in history? Was it just punishment? Or was there a deeper lesson behind his fall and eventual redemption? Today we dive deep into the biblical account of Nebuchadnezzar's transformation and uncover the powerful message it holds, not just for him, but for all of us. Because in many ways, Nebuchadnezzar's story isn't just ancient history. It's a warning, a lesson, and a glimpse into the nature of pride, power, and divine justice. To understand why God humbled Nebuchadnezzar, we first need to understand who he was. King Nebuchadnezzar II was one of the most powerful rulers in ancient history. He reigned over the Neo-Babylonian Empire from 605 to 562 BC, expanding its influence to heights never seen before. Nebuchadnezzar came to power after the death of his father, King Nabopolassar. His early reign was marked by military conquests that established Babylon as the dominant empire in the region. One of his most famous victories was the defeat of the Egyptian and Assyrian forces at the Battle of Carchemish, 605 BC, securing Babylon's control over Mesopotamia. But Nebuchadnezzar is perhaps best known in biblical history for his siege and destruction of Jerusalem. In 597 BC, he besieged the city, taking King Jehoiakim and thousands of Israelites into exile. Then, in 586 BC, after a rebellion, he returned and completely destroyed Solomon's temple, reducing Jerusalem to ruins. This event, known as the Babylonian captivity, would last for 70 years and deeply impact Jewish history and prophecy. Among the exiles taken to Babylon was a young Jewish noble named Daniel. Through divine wisdom, Daniel rose to prominence in Nebuchadnezzar's court, interpreting dreams and revealing God's messages to the king. It was Daniel who first warned Nebuchadnezzar that his pride would lead to a great fall, a warning that would later come true in the most astonishing way. Nebuchadnezzar witnessed incredible miracles, the survival of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and Daniel's ability to reveal secrets no man could know. Yet despite these signs, the king's pride continued to grow. And so, God prepared a lesson that would shake the very foundations of his rule. Nebuchadnezzar II is one of the most well-documented rulers of the ancient world. He reigned over the Neo-Babylonian Empire from 605 to 562 BC, transforming Babylon into the most magnificent city of its time. His legacy is still visible today through ancient inscriptions, tablets, and ruins scattered across Mesopotamia. One of the most famous inscriptions, found on the ruins of Babylon, records his pride in his construction projects. Nebuchadnezzar boasts, "I built magnificent temples and great walls that no king before me had built." His obsession with power and grandeur set the stage for his eventual downfall. Babylon was more than a military powerhouse. It was a city of architectural and cultural wonders. Nebuchadnezzar expanded and fortified it, making it the most dazzling city of the ancient world. The Ishtar Gate, decorated with images of lions and dragons, was one of the grand entrances to the city, leading to a processional way that extended for half a mile. Some historians believe he also constructed the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, though its existence remains debated. While Nebuchadnezzar is remembered for his architectural achievements, his most infamous act in biblical history was the siege and destruction of Jerusalem. In 597 BC, he captured the city and took King Jehoiakim, the nobility, and skilled workers into exile. But when the Jews rebelled again, he returned in 586 BC, destroyed Solomon's temple, and deported the remaining population to Babylon. This event, known as the Babylonian captivity, lasted for 70 years, as prophesied by Jeremiah. This isn't just a biblical story. Babylonian records confirm it. The Babylonian Chronicles, a series of ancient cuneiform inscriptions, detail Nebuchadnezzar's conquests, including the siege of Jerusalem. One such tablet, known as the Jehoiakim ration tablet, found in Babylon, even records food rations given to King Jehoiakim and his family while in captivity, a direct historical confirmation of the Bible's account. Among the captives taken to Babylon were Daniel and his 3 companions, young Jewish nobles who were chosen to serve in the king's court. Through divine wisdom, Daniel quickly rose to prominence, interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great statue, predicting the rise and fall of future empires. Later, Daniel's God would also save his companions from a fiery furnace, an event that momentarily humbled the king, yet did not fully change him. Despite these miraculous signs, Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance only grew. He saw himself as the supreme ruler of the world, believing his power to be unquestionable. But that belief would soon be shattered in the most humbling way imaginable. Despite all his wealth, power, and military victories, Nebuchadnezzar was deeply disturbed by a dream, a vision so terrifying that none of his wise men could explain it. Desperate for answers, he called upon Daniel, the prophet who had previously revealed the meanings of his dreams. In his dream, the king saw a colossal tree, reaching to the heavens, its branches covering the entire earth. Birds nested in its limbs, animals found shade beneath it, and all living creatures were sustained by its fruit. But then, suddenly, a divine decree was issued. A heavenly being, a watcher, descended and proclaimed, "Cut down the tree and lop off its branches, strip its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump with its roots in the ground, bound with iron and bronze, in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth." Daniel 4:14-15. Daniel, upon hearing the dream, was troubled. He knew the meaning, and it was not good news for the king. Summoning his courage, he revealed its message. "My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies, and not to you." Daniel began, "But this is its meaning. The great tree is you, O king. You have grown strong. Your dominion reaches to the ends of the earth. But because of your pride, God has decreed your downfall." Daniel 4:22-24. The stump left in the ground means your kingdom will endure, but only until you learn the ultimate lesson. The Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whomever he chooses. Daniel then issued a warning: "Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and show mercy to the oppressed. Perhaps then your prosperity will continue." Daniel 4:27. God's message was clear. If Nebuchadnezzar did not humble himself, his power would be stripped away, and he would be driven to live like a wild animal. But would the king listen? Or would his arrogance bring the prophecy to life? A peculiar inscription, believed to be from Nebuchadnezzar's time, describes a period where the king seemingly withdrew from his royal duties. The text states, "He gave contradictory orders. He did not show love to son or daughter. His family and court suffered greatly." This aligns with the biblical account, where Nebuchadnezzar became mentally unstable, living away from society and acting like a beast. In the 3rd century BC, a Babylonian priest named Berossus wrote a history of Babylon. He describes Nebuchadnezzar as a great king, but also records an unusual event. Toward the end of his reign, he disappeared from the public eye for a significant period. Some historians believe this could correspond to his 7 years of madness mentioned in Daniel 4. For much of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar was an active military leader, expanding Babylon's borders. However, in his later years, historical records show a strange gap. There are no major military campaigns recorded, which is highly unusual for a ruler of his stature. Could this gap indicate the period when Nebuchadnezzar lived in isolation, suffering from his divine punishment? Interestingly, another Babylonian king, Nabonidus, who ruled after Nebuchadnezzar, is recorded as having abandoned his throne for years, living in isolation in the Arabian desert. Some scholars speculate that later traditions may have confused his story with Nebuchadnezzar's. However, this shows that long absences from rule due to mysterious reasons were not unheard of in Babylonian history. While we may never find a Babylonian tablet explicitly stating Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind and lived like an animal, the gaps in historical records, strange inscriptions, and later Babylonian accounts suggest something unusual happened. The Bible remains the most detailed record of this event, offering a spiritual explanation for a historical mystery. 1 year after Daniel's warning, Nebuchadnezzar had not changed. His kingdom was still at the height of power, and in his mind he was untouchable. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. Nebuchadnezzar, quoting Daniel 4:30, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power, and for the glory of my majesty?" Before the words even left his mouth, a divine decree fell upon him. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, your kingdom has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people to live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox, and 7 times will pass over you, until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men." From that moment, Nebuchadnezzar was no longer the same. He was driven away from the palace, his mind fractured, his body unkempt. The great king of Babylon became like a beast. He lived away from human society, his body drenched with the dew of heaven. Over time, his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. Could Nebuchadnezzar's condition be explained medically? Some historians and psychologists suggest he may have suffered from a rare disorder known as Boanthropy or Lycanthropy. Boanthropy is a psychological disorder where a person believes they are an ox or a cow, mimicking their behavior, eating grass, walking on all fours, and avoiding human interaction. Cases have been documented in modern times, though they remain rare. Lycanthropy is another rare mental disorder where individuals believe they have physically transformed into an animal, usually a wolf, but sometimes other creatures. While not identical to Nebuchadnezzar's case, it offers a psychological explanation for his drastic behavior change. Was Nebuchadnezzar's condition simply a rare psychological disorder, or was it a direct act of divine judgment, as the Bible describes? Regardless of the cause, his fate proved one thing: no earthly power is greater than God's sovereignty. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation was more than just a punishment. It was a lesson for all of history. His downfall was not due to military defeat or rebellion, but his own arrogance. The Bible consistently warns about the dangers of pride. In Proverbs 16:18, we read, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful man in the world, yet in a moment, God humbled him to the level of a wild beast. Nebuchadnezzar's story is not unique. Throughout history, God has humbled those who exalt themselves, proving that no earthly power can stand against him. Pharaoh of Egypt refused to acknowledge God's authority, even after witnessing the plagues. His arrogance led to the devastation of his kingdom and the destruction of his army in the Red Sea. Centuries later, King Herod Agrippa I stood before his people. When they praised him as a god, he failed to give glory to the true God, and Scripture says he was struck down and eaten by worms. Whether it's Pharaoh, Herod, or Nebuchadnezzar, the pattern is the same. When rulers exalt themselves above God, their power is stripped away. This lesson isn't just for kings, it's for all of us. Today, people chase success, power, and recognition, forgetting that all we have comes from God. When we rely on ourselves instead of Him, we risk the same downfall. Pride isolates us, blinds us, and leads to destruction. But humility opens the door to wisdom, restoration, and God's grace. Nebuchadnezzar's story didn't end in the wilderness. When he lifted his eyes to heaven and acknowledged God's sovereignty, his sanity and kingdom were restored. His final words weren't about his greatness, but about God's. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. After 7 long years of suffering, something changed in Nebuchadnezzar. The mighty king, who had once glorified himself, finally lifted his eyes to heaven. And in that moment, his sanity and his soul were restored. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified Him who lives forever. What happened next was unheard of. His kingdom was given back to him. Most rulers who vanish from power for years never return, but God had preserved Nebuchadnezzar's throne. Daniel 4:36. At the same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. Nebuchadnezzar had once believed that his power was his own, that he was the master of his destiny. But through his suffering, he learned that only God is sovereign. The most powerful king of his time was brought lower than an animal, only to be lifted up again, not by his own strength, but by God's mercy. His final recorded words reflect a man completely changed. Daniel 4:37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Nebuchadnezzar's story is not just about judgment, it's about redemption. It proves that no one, no matter how powerful or lost, is beyond God's reach. If the most arrogant king in history could be transformed by humility, what can God do in our lives? Nebuchadnezzar's journey, from arrogance to humiliation to redemption, is one of the most powerful lessons in history. Through him, we see that pride leads to downfall, but humility before God leads to restoration. This story teaches us 3 vital truths. 1. Pride is dangerous and can blind us to reality. 2. God is sovereign over all, and no human power is absolute. 3. Redemption is possible when we humble ourselves before God. Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful ruler of his time, but in the end, he learned that power, wealth, and success are meaningless without acknowledging the one who gives them. How often do we fall into the same trap today? Do we rely on our own strength and achievements? Or do we recognize that everything we have is a gift from God? I'd love to hear from you. What stood out to you most in Nebuchadnezzar's story? Have you ever had a moment where life humbled you and made you see things differently? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you found this video insightful, give it a like. Subscribe for more deep dives into biblical history and lessons that still apply today. Thanks for watching, and remember, true wisdom begins with humility before God. See you in the next video.